I'll make a couple of comments and I'm certainly happy to take some questions. We've just had one of the most exciting rounds of finals footy, I think, of all time. Every game went down to the wire, 2 games decided by 2 points, and another game into extra time. I tell you what, we're very fortunate to have a sporting contest as even as this. And yet, in a fantastic round of finals, it's been marred by the response of some of the losing teams. Unfortunately, we've developed a culture in our game of blaming match officials for a loss. It sets a terrible example to fans and a terrible example to grassroots, and it's got to stop. It's time for the game to grow up. What I saw on the weekend was nothing short of phenomenal. Latrell Mitchell's try to win it for the Roosters, a young Panthers team, the performance of Nathan Cleary, Cameron Smith breaking an all-time record, a once-in-a-generation moment, the Eels going toe-to-toe with the premiership favourites, the Cowboys, who've been decimated by injury all year, still alive in week 2, the performances of Tom Malolo, the composure of Michael Morgan, nothing short of phenomenal. I'm not saying the referees are perfect. They never have been and they never will be. I'm not saying our referees got every call right, but I have reviewed the games and I can tell you the vast majority of the calls were spot on. The disputes we're talking about are on some really tight calls, 50-50 calls. And there'll be debate and there'll be controversy no matter which way that they go. That is the game. But players make mistakes too, and that's what costs games. That's why teams lose. It's not the referees. And that culture has to change. We have to grow up and we have to take responsibility for our own outcomes. Let me say this again. We had a great weekend of footy. Every game was a cliffhanger. And it's disappointing that losing coaches think that it's okay to take away from that wonderful weekend of footy and attack match officials. We expect a lot more from people in such influential positions. Our coaches have a responsibility to the game as well as a responsibility to their clubs. And their actions and their comments must reflect that always. Emotion and passion and the heartbreak of your season ending is not an excuse. The game really does need to grow up. I don't want you to leave here and think that we don't have our part to play in this too. The refs are far from perfect and they need to be better. Many of them will fight for a contract and for their own livelihoods again next year. Everyone in the game is under pressure and the referees are no different. But to suggest that a team won't be playing finals football this weekend is only due to refereeing errors is ridiculous and it needs to be called out. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Will you be fighting the 2 coaches, Todd?
Both clubs will receive breach notices in the next 24 hours.
Can you give us an indication of what it may be financially?
No, I haven't made that decision yet.
Is it a case of sore losers?
Look, that's a matter for people to debate. What I'm saying today is that there's an issue inside our game that people look for blame. And I've seen it too often, and today's an opportunity to call it out, which is what I'm doing.
Todd, have you spoken to Trent Barrett or Sean Clayton?
No, I haven't.
Will you speak to them?
My understanding is Brian Canavan and Tony Archer have spoken to both of them, and they will go through in great detail every incident they want to look through. But what I'm saying today is a pretty simple message. I'm not prepared to stand around and allow match officials to be blamed as the only reason for a club's loss. It's not on.
Does the NRL need to tighten rules about what coaches can and can't say?
Well, again, I've been pretty pragmatic over the last couple of years because I think it's important that coaches can talk about decisions, but what I saw yesterday was not on, and we can't allow that to happen.
Todd, there's been a standard fine for coaches talking out against referees of $10,000 a month. Does that need to get bigger? Is that significant? Because coaches go to the CEO and say, can I have 10 this week? And they just take it. 10 doesn't seem enough.
Yeah, we might have to look at that, Brent. We may have to look at actions that have a deterrent. So if we need to change it, we'll change it.
Are you concerned if we keep single meetings for referees for not having that?
Well, I've said this regularly, particularly at junior footy. I don't want a day to come around where the kids run out and they can't play because there's no one in the middle with the whistle. I don't have a lot of people lining up outside my office to work within match officials. It's a tough part of the industry. And I don't want anyone to walk away today thinking that I'm suggesting that our referees can't improve, because they can. And they're being held to account like never before in the game. There are a lot of people in that department under significant pressure, and I want them to improve, and we'll continue to help them improve. But it won't help them improve if we continue to do the things the game does, and that's why we're calling it out today.
Do you find it difficult that the bunker that goes to air on the broadcast is very different to the screens that they're seeing in there?
Yeah, sometimes we'll need to talk with our broadcast partners about making sure that's better for the fans so they can understand how decisions are made. But again, I'd say this regularly, some of the calls we're talking about are so line ball and they're so 50-50. And I understand as well as you do that fans will watch games through the prism of the team of their colours. And that's okay, that's exactly what the game's about the emotion and passion. But we're talking about leaders in our sport. We're talking about leaders of their clubs who have a responsibility to the game as well as their own club. And we can't stand around and have them hitting the referees like they have and blaming them solely for performance. It's not on, it's not right.
So Tony Archer's been in the crosshairs a bit. Is Tony doing a good job?
Tony, first of all, I'll say about Tony, he's got a tough job, a really tough job. What he has to deal with on a weekly basis, dealing with the coaches and clubs, people won't understand the level of complexity in that. In saying that though, Tony can improve. But our job is to help all of our people improve, whether it's Tony Archer or others. We want to help people improve. We want to improve the game. And what the behaviour and the cultural attitude is in the game is not helping that.
Is he under pressure? You've said a lot of people are under pressure. Is Tony one of them?
Yeah, Tony will be under pressure. He's under pressure on a weekly basis, as are the gentlemen and the ladies that run out and man our referees and run the lines and make decisions every weekend. They're making hundreds of calls in split-second time. They're not going to get them right every time. They will make mistakes. That has always been the case, and I'm sure it will always continue.
A lot of fans don't like the fact that a try or no try decision has to be decided by the ref before going to the bunker. Will that be reviewed in the off-season?
Look, we'll talk about it with coaches and we'll talk about it with the competition committee, but for people who've been around the game for a long time, we tried that many years ago, and it got to benefit of the doubt. The way the system works at the moment, it's a review mechanism. Referees are paid to make decisions on the field, and that's what we expect.
So are you saying that Tony's under pressure at his position, or are you saying he's under pressure week to week?
No, I'm saying he's under pressure in a difficult job. He has a very difficult job to do, and he has a very public performance review 8 times in a normal round and 4 times in week 1 of the finals. He's got a tough job. And I can assure you of this, there's not a lot of people lining up to work inside the match officials because of the barrage of criticism they cop. Some of it is well earned, but some of it's not.
So you've been as big a champion of the bunkers anyway. Do you think it's been a success?
Look, I think the bunker will create debate, just like technology in every sport creates debate. But the reality is decision making around our technology through the bunker has come down year on year, and we've got to use it at the right moments. You know, when you play in a competition as close as ours, every decision matters. What we're trying to do is make as many as we can and get them right, because there are big consequences in games. And by and large, I think it's done a pretty good job.
Todd, what do you say when people suggest that you want coaches to be honest? When they are honest, you find them?
I think I'd question that about honesty in relation to the fact that the sole reason that your team is not playing in the finals is around match officials. I don't think that's an accurate assessment.
Not condoning what they've just said, but is it tough on the coaches to walk into a press conference straight after a match where there's so much conjecture and the emotion that it's hard to answer questions that are asked to them?
From what I saw on the weekend, the coaches had a fair amount of time before they stepped out of a coach's box, enough time to consider carefully what they wanted to say. They're leaders in the sport. They need to think very carefully.
These are breach notices. Do you anticipate they'll be in excess of $10,000?
Look, I haven't made that determination yet. The breach notice process will fold through as it normally does. We'll give that some consideration this afternoon, but both clubs can expect a breach notice today.
Were the crowd numbers on the weekend a pass mark for the NRL?
I was a little disappointed in some of the crowds, but I am very enthusiastic about the crowds that come in week 2 and week 3. I would expect Parramatta fans this weekend at ANZ Stadium to come out in force and see their team play in a home final for the first time since, I think, 2009. And I also expect a significant number in Brisbane to watch the Broncos and Panthers. So I'm buoyant about what's going to happen this weekend.
So Scott Pensy, who's going to ring you today, talk to you about officiating, but also the home final debate. Have you spoken to him today?
I haven't spoken to Scott yet, but I'm sure I will. I've been a little preoccupied this morning, but I'm sure Scott and I will talk this afternoon.
What about that argument that obviously games played. I know we've had some long-standing argument about finals where they should be played. Is
Yeah.
there any wriggle room there from your perspective?
Well, the policy gets set on an annual basis. We've spoken about this for a number of years. My simple view is we should be talking the sport up. We should be finding ways to get more people to the games rather than finding excuses for them not to come.
Todd, do you think refereeing decisions are keeping the crowds down?
No, I don't.
Why do you think we can't attract big crowds?
Oh, look, I've said this for a number of months. I'll say it again, particularly in Sydney. Sydney average crowds have not changed for the best part of 2 decades. They are usually 1 or 2% up or down annually, year on year. And that won't change until we make a different decision on stadiums. That decision's coming down the pipe quickly with government, but we won't change the difficulties we face on stadium crowds in Sydney until we have a different stadium strategy.
Todd, sorry, I know it was in the papers on the weekend.
Yep.
Can we just get it on the record, your endorsement of marriage equality?
Sure. The game has a small number of values. One of those values is inclusiveness. It's an easy thing to write on a wall, but it needs to be demonstrated in actions. And so the decision that we made public on the weekend, I think, is a simple one, but also the right one.
Is it your job to make political statements like that, Todd?
Certainly not a political statement. What it says is that rugby league allows everyone to make their own decisions, but ultimately as a sport it's inclusive and it's a game for everybody.
What feedback have you had since that was announced?
Nothing but positive response.
Todd, another one at the same time is spate of penalties incurred by sides inside their own 20 metre zone. Sides giving away penalties to give away the cheap penalty. Is it something you could look at? Bill Harrigan quoted, you give away a penalty in your own red zone, you spend the next 7-6 at the back on the defensive line.
That was talked about at the competition committee meeting recently, and I expect that will create some more discussion in the November meeting. I'd say this to you though, this year I think we've passed more than 40 sin bin offences in this season. That's more than double what we did last year, and that was on the back of the coaches and the competition committee making a more considered response for foul play, and I think they've been very consistent in that space over this season.
You just getting sick of sides giving away penalties for the sake of giving away 2 points?
Look, again, we'll talk about it at the end of the year, but if you look at the weekend's results, 2 points or 1 point decides a game. So if you're giving away penalties in your own red zone and allowing the other team to kick 2 points, that's your decision.